I would like to welcome you for this morning briefing on the election, on the parliamentary election in Georgia, which took place on Saturday. I think these were again crucial elections for Georgia, maybe even more crucial than previous elections, since it decided if the country will have a chance to return to an EU integration track, or it will lose maybe also its orientation and become more vulnerable towards Russian influence and influence maybe of also other external actors. And I think we have to say also this is not just an important election for Georgia. This is also an important election for the region and beyond the region, since Georgia is a key country for the South Caucasus, but also for the wider region because of different reasons. According to the official results, the ruling Georgian Dream Party won the election with nearly 54% of votes, with an absolute majority, and all opposition parties together who entered the threshold got around 38%. The polling is in about 90% of the constituencies was conducted electronically. I think which is important because it is also it could be also a mean for manipulation of the result. We observed months of tense election campaign where the ruling Georgian Dreams Party used anti-democratic and anti-Western rhetoric, introduced the foreign agent law, and tried to fool also homophobia within this election campaign. And the official results come as a shock to many opposition or pro-opposition voters and the organized civil society who expected GD to have lost the support. Georgian Dream campaign was about that Georgia would be dragged into a war. So they try to gain also on the fears in the society and were playing with this. According to ODIHR, the election observers from OSCE, there were reports of pressure on voters, particularly on public sector employees. There was an extensive tracking of voters on election day, which raised concerns about the ability of many voters to cast their vote without fear. Looking into the report, so we are now so it was on Saturday, I think, if we're looking into the report of independent election observers and civil society organization, there seems to be a comprehensive scheme of voter and voting manipulation, including massive vote buying by the ruling party. Opposition parties challenged the election result, and a coalition of election observers demanded the annulment of the election. We saw at the same time a very early congratulation by Hungary's Viktor Orban and also from the Russian leadership. So I think this is very much also about the legitimization of this election, where we see a kind of interference, and we see very critical voices from member states about the quality of the election by the European Parliament, by the US organizations, but also the government. I'm very happy to have 4 speakers here this morning. Just very quickly to introduce that we can start. We have Saba Brachveli, who is a human rights program coordinator at Civil Society Foundation. Good morning for you. We have Nikuradze, who is a journalist at Open Caucasus Media, also reporting since many years on situation and developments in Georgia. Good morning also for you. Meister Spellerberg is a member of the German Bundestag, German Parliament, for the Alliance of 90s the Greens, and also a key person on the South Caucasus and Georgia in her own party. Good morning also for you. And Julian Bourtembourg, deputy head of the division Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus at the European External Action Service in Brussels. Good morning for you. Let's start maybe with the 2 Georgian speakers who are also in Georgia and I think observe from different angles, let's say like this election, and then have maybe a reaction also from Berlin and from Brussels afterwards. That's why I would maybe start with Saba, also as a lawyer, yeah, and as someone who is from a human rights perspective, but also from a civil society perspective with this election. So how do you see now the outcome of the election day, the whole environment of this election? What are your main takeaways also from this election, and maybe also the legitimization of this election?
Hello, and thank you for this opportunity, and please excuse my voice. I have lost it like 2 days ago, and it hasn't come back yet. And yes, I do agree with the assessment that Stefan just provided. What we saw even before the election day took place was the context of serious and substantial violations. Especially, it was a complex scheme of election fraud, which was done through the confiscation and renting, so-called renting of ID cards and collection of personal data. The journal, well, and due to such manipulations, it became possible to obtain basically the decisive number of votes in favor of the ruling party. What we saw in the results is that there are abnormalities, which we will talk about later. And this was done through this confiscation and renting of the ID cards. What happened on the election day was unprecedented pressure exerted on the representatives of our monitoring mission and other monitoring organizations as well. I represent the monitoring mission of My Vote, which represents unites 30 civil society organizations. We had about 2,000 observers in all electoral districts of Georgia. We had 150 observers in the abroad in the election precincts opened abroad, and basically we received mostly the similar reports from everywhere, from all electoral districts of Georgia, and it was. It was reports regarding physical attacks, verbal abuse, intimidation, expulsion from the electoral precincts without reason, and hindrance to observe the voting process. Basically, our observers were just stopped by any means from conducting their activities, meaning they were stopped from observing the procedure. We have obtained about like not just verbal or other sort of proof, but photographic and video evidence, more than 330 pieces of evidence, which show a systemic nature of the violations that I will later talk about. And we are currently starting a sort of a campaign where just the ordinary citizens will sort of tell their story, ordinary observers as well, and they will basically post this through social media and say how they witnessed the rigging of this election. Yeah, so during the day, there was concentration of unauthorized persons in the polling precinct and outside of the polling precincts. They were obviously there to sort of either intimidate or bribe the constituents. Neither the election administration nor the law enforcement reacted to any facts of any gross violations of the law, and there was a clear impression that the persons who were involved in rigging these elections had guarantees that nobody would touch them. We received, or like the violations that we received the information about, were like were quite diverse in nature, but ultimately they sort of unite in the scheme of how the election was rigged. I will just read through basically all these violations that we recorded and which we submitted to the Central Election Commission. We finished submitting them just 3 hours ago. These violations include the violation of voting secrecy, which means that other people were looking at the ballot, like to see what party the constituent colored. The voting instead of somebody else, and repeatedly we saw this was the main aspect of this rigging procedure. Basically, the ruling party sort of confiscated or rented tens of thousands of ID cards from the people who had voted for opposition parties in 2020 elections, who live in villages. And later they went to the polling precincts and voted on behalf of them, which explained the discrepancy in the final results. And this was done through non-inking or voting without inking at the polling precincts. And this was these were the violations which our observers actually took notice of and recorded through photo and video means. And basically, the people would enter in all the precincts and they would be allowed in without any sort of inking, and they would vote without any sort of checking whether they had ink on their fingers or not. And when our observers tried to demand that the inking was checked or inking was made or verification was done if this person was or the person they actually said they were, our observers were either threatened with physical violence, or they were subjected to physical violence and verbal threats, or they were just expelled from the precinct altogether. And this was this was how the election day actually went on. We had one precinct where 7 different observers were expelled. We had an observer who was thrown out the precinct, and later they were physically assaulted multiple times. So they were expelled from 4 different precincts. Basically, what we saw was a very well coordinated scheme of very well coordinated scheme of just people going to the precincts and voting on behalf of others. And because of the involvement of the Central Election Commission and the law enforcement, there was very little for the observers to do, because ultimately they demanded that things were done by the book, but they weren't. So what happens now is that we saw the reactions from the other states. We saw the reactions from the international organizations. They also what we saw, but they are very cautious in their remarks. They want to sort of tiptoe between like legitimizing this election and saying that the election was outright rigged. This is why we are planning, and we already started this campaign through social media. I witnessed the rigging of election. It's a smaller hashtag in Georgian. And people, just ordinary people, will write their stories of what they witnessed. And we know that there's a demonstration today planned at 7 p.m. local time, and we see how that goes. And we also submitted, as I mentioned already, all these written complaints to the CEC and to the courts. However, as we already know from the previous years and from the well-documented reports by the EU, by the Council of Europe and the Venice Commission. The courts are in the pockets of the ruling party, and there will be very little that we can do through legal means. So this is a very difficult situation for the democracy in Georgia, for the civil society, and for, I would say, every Georgian altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Also, I think there's some very important details you mentioned. Just one quick follow-up question. Do you see a new quality of manipulation and pressure compared to previous elections? And do you think the amount of manipulation, so is it much higher than we saw it before? Maybe it's still difficult to assess this, but I just want to understand if you talk about a scheme also. So the level of preparedness seems to be much higher, and there seems to be a learning effect. That's why. Do you see a new quality also of manipulation?
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, I actually wanted to emphasize this, and I was probably not good at it. So this was a completely unprecedented level of preparedness in terms of voter buying, vote buying, because what we saw in the previous elections, it was just basically trying to bribe people in the villages, in the rural areas on the election day. This, what we witnessed now, was done like months before the election day, like weeks before even. Like the government officials, the representatives of the Special Security Service, the local governors, and basically all the people that GD unites, they went out in the villages and they just basically took away, they rented or confiscated like weeks and months before the IDs of the opposition voters. And this is something that has really never happened in Georgia. Like this was a very well coordinated scheme that was done, and basically this is how, and also the people who were basically bribed, they believe that they were just not voting, no, that they were promised that they were not, they would not be demanded to vote for the ruling party, because that would be like a moral conundrum for them, right? So they just gave away their ID cards, believing that it was just them not voting. What really happened was that these people, the special security service people and the local government representatives, they went to the precincts and voted through these ID cards on behalf of the opposition voters. This is why there are about like these statistical discrepancies are very telling. We will present like the statistical data and the deviations from 2020 elections, and also like from the precincts who are next to each other. And it will show that basically what happened was that the opposition is sort of lacking the votes that they should have had, and these votes are sort of gone to the to GD. That they should not have had, because like these precincts who are next to each other, who have the same demographics, same everything. They have like one of them has like sort of 45-40 split, which was like normal, and the other has 90% GD vote, which is abnormal, and this does not happen like at many polling stations. We have gathered 111 precincts who are the most critical, who show who are were from our observers during the whole day indicated that there was voter fraud ongoing, and also the statistical data backs it up, and we will obviously disseminate this data in possibly today or in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mariam, let's switch to you. I think information sphere played a crucial role also in this election campaign, even more than before, also in terms of manipulation, also attacks on media, independent reporting. I think this is a very important sphere also for organizing, let's say, this result of the election. So how do you see the role of media here? How do you see the changes in the information sphere? And if you also want to comment on the election day or the election itself, where do you think there are key issues which should be additionally mentioned? So please do so.
Yeah, so like first of all, I think Saba mentioned some irregularities in general in the picture of the election. So I want to share two graphs that I tweeted yesterday, which I think were very weird, and it shows something. I just will drop it in the chat and our viewers can see them. One is about the huge gap between capital and the regions, how people voted. And it's like, sure, very often in the city, people's attitudes are more opposition compared to the regions, but in this case, the difference is too huge, and I don't believe this is true. And another one is about exit polls versus real results. And this is also weird. Take a look and make your own conclusions. Before I move to media, my personal impression is that the election results do not reflect will of the people. I covered every election since 2012, and I'm convinced that this is the case. The elections were rigged before the election and on the election day. How it happened, I think our colleagues and friends from watchdog groups will tell about it very soon in their reports. As for media environment, it was hostile. It's not something very new because like on the election day, media workers are treated quite badly, but it was more than usual. I can speak about our own experience at Los Media. We had only around 14 journalists dispatched all over Georgia, and many of them experienced some kind of pressure. Mostly it was verbal, but our journalist who we sent in Yormugalo, which is very isolated ethnic Azerbaijani minority place, she was constantly interrupted, and people from the pressing tried to take away her phone multiple times also. Then we had journalist who was working in Guria, and she observed a lot of violations herself, but also she had a case when law enforcement officer called her parents and asked to blur his face in the videos she took outside the precinct, where it was related to some kind of lists of the voters that they had, and they were trying to mobilize people. So yeah, like our journalists observed cases of like people being bribed, like they were given money outside the precinct, which is again not a new thing. There were a lot of cases of many people going into this voting cabin. We saw it. I also saw it myself. And there were cases when the election commission members could clearly see the choice people made on these ballot papers, which is, I mean, a whole campaign about nobody will know who you vote for ahead of the election kind of questioned this, because I mean, I don't know, like there were so many reports about this, so many people were also confused about this electronic vote. And I want to remind you that when it came to introducing the electronic vote, GD didn't really resist to it. They kind of happily introduced this new thing for this election, and I think there was a reason for it. So yeah, a lot of people didn't know how to vote. I met a person, for example, sorry, I don't know what happened. A person who told me that he didn't know that the electronic vote included him actually taking a pen and marking his choice. So he directly went to the ballot box and casted his empty ballot paper and was not given a chance to do it again. Nobody explained to him what he was supposed to do. And there were a few other cases that our journalists observed, which was similar to this one. So, so far on the election day, from media rights groups and lawyers, there have been observed around a couple of dozen of cases of serious attacks and violations of media rights, which affected around 30 journalists. There were people who are physically attacked, for example, in Kutaisi, where journalist Giga Gelchidze was documenting again violations related to the election lists, and 3 people attacked him. Also, journalist of Tisam Baby, Gelo Tubishvili, was attacked, and they took his phone. Taking away equipment or damaging equipment was not a rare thing. We had camera operators and journalists of TV channels from Brachveli and Metawari TV, where they were attacked and their cameras were damaged. It kind of felt as if the election commission members were kind of encouraged to do that. I mean, they had the freedom to just sometimes or very often ban journalists from filming on the polling station and saying that you cannot do this, or you should just stand on this spot, which is illegal. I mean, there are very certain and specific regulations for journalists for filming on the polling stations, but the heads of the Central Election Commission were abusing their power and restricting media professionals to work on the pressings the way they wanted. Yeah, so for me, I mean, I'm not surprised how media professionals were treated on the election day, but in general, as I said, my impression is that election results do not reflect the will of Georgian people, and there are reasons behind this, which Saba just explained really well. If you have any questions, I can answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for these impressions. Just one follow-up question. I think my impression is that the narratives which were spread also impacted on the voting behavior. So this to threaten the society with a war, with fear, I think also undermining in a way the relations with the EU, yeah. So and what it means. So how do you see this also in terms of that maybe many people in the end voted for GD? So that's not only just manipulation, but I think there is a relevant amount of people. That's maybe also a question who voted for GD also because of different reasons. So how do you see this kind of campaign in the information sphere we had before impacting then on the election and on the voting behavior of the people?
Sure. So first of all, I want to say that in 2012, when Georgian Dream came to power, 54% voted for them. Same percent that they received this year, which I don't believe that the same amount of people support GD than in 2012. I don't feel that. And in 2012, I could feel that this government was changing and people really were voting for Georgian Dream. As for the campaign, sure, in cases, of course, the war part of the campaign worked the best. I mean, Georgian Dream's campaign was built on 3 things: less LGBT propaganda, more power to church, and no war. First 2 were just extremely abstract, and not many people can associate themselves with this kind of like promises. This is not the reason why people vote for different parties. There were no social promises on specific issues like, I don't know, jobs or poverty or prices of medicine, prices of food, prices of rent, things that actually matter. So what was most effective in the Georgian Dream campaign was this no war part, but I don't think it was that effective that they would have received 54%. I think Saba wants to comment something. You can add if you want, just so you.
Let's maybe move forward, and then you still have maybe later also the opportunity to comment, because I would also then later ask about the opposition and how effective they have been also in the selection campaign. But let's pick this up later. Merle, maybe you want to. What did you observe with this election? How would you comment also on what you have heard and what you have seen, also as a parliamentarian, from the German Bundestag? So maybe also your impressions, but also your assessment, and what does it mean also for the relations with Georgia, and yeah.
Yeah, good morning from my side. And first of all, I was actually very glad to be able to listen to Saba and Mariam first, because I think today at this early stage, it actually is most important to listen to those reports and then conclude on a political level on what to do with that. But what we can see quite clearly is, and that was also pointed out by the statement of my colleagues from various European and Canadian parliaments, that the elections were neither free nor fair. And now we have to ask ourselves how to continue with the relations, what to do now. I think when we look back at the resolution that we decided upon in the German Bundestag, and not long ago, that was first and foremost a sign of solidarity with those in Georgia who are standing up for democracy. And we also called for fair and free elections, and we can now see that sadly did not happen. What is important for us definitely is that this solidarity with the democratic powers in Georgia lasts and continues. I think it is still, you mentioned that as well in one of the last sentences, we still have to respect, of course, those who also voted for GD, but of course not the manipulations and irregularities that we can see. So coming back to the question, what now? Speaking as a parliamentarian myself, of course, a vote and elections are the most important thing in the democracy, maybe, if you can actually call it like that. So what now? We have seen various reports that state that the elections were neither free nor fair. And I think looking at the OSCE and ODIHR statements from them, that they're also rather critical from their perspective. So I think one thing that we should definitely look up on are independent investigations, even though we have to, and I think that's something that would be interesting to discuss in this round as well, who could actually do them. Because if we look at the Georgian institutions, most of them are either state captured, or if we look at the president, highly politicized. The Georgian Dream will probably not accept a new clean election. I think it is important that on an international level, together with Georgian institutions, not state institutions, but the democratic powers, we really have to take a look at what we can do now, actually. Coming back to ODIHR, I mean, their final statement hasn't been released yet. I think that's something we have definitely to take a close look at as soon as that is there. Because, of course, that is an independent institution. I think actually I will leave it with that for now, because I think it is more interesting to actually continue the debate from here on.
Thank you. Just one quick follow-up question also for you. I think Saba mentioned this, that the remarks from international institutions were quite cautious. Do you think there should be stronger statements also, or maybe clearer, sharper arguments about the manipulations we have seen? And we know how cautious always ODIHR also is. Yeah, in doing this, it has been criticized also from some of them. But on the other hand, I think it's maybe also right. So how do you see the role maybe also of being very critical, and at the same time we see Mr. Orban traveling today to Tbilisi and also legitimizing maybe these election results?
I think the visit from Mr. Orban is highly problematical on many levels, as we cannot really say that the elections, or we can say that the elections were not free and not fair. We have to say it, and if a statesman is then traveling to that country, that's just really, really problematic. And probably that is his clear intention to send that signal. For me, as standing on the outside, it's actually quite well, I'm not sure if problematic is the right word, but it makes it very difficult to have the different statements, even though for ODIHR, it's for their language, it's rather clear, but still that of course leaves room for discussions, and of course it is always easier to work with very, very clear statements from all relevant sides. So I think it would be weird from my point of view to call for a clearer statement, because I have not observed the elections myself, but we definitely have to find a way to have a clear image, because right now, listening to other observers who are on the ground, we do get a clear image, if that makes any sense, what I said.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely makes sense. Julien, maybe from a Brussels perspective, how would you comment on these elections, and what does it mean also for the relations between Georgia and the EU? Yeah, from a EU institutional perspective, let's say it like this.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to speakers before me for sharing their first-hand experience of election day, but also the months of campaigns leading to what happened on Saturday. You saw that the EU reacted officially yesterday through the High Representative and also the President of the European Council. And like speakers before, we note that there have been a lot of reported irregularities, in particular reports of intimidation and pressure on voters on the day of the election, but also in the weeks leading to that during the campaign. And this raises really strong concerns about the ability of voters to cast their vote without any fear of retribution. And also it raises concerns about the trust in the process. So the main message that we have sent so far to the authorities and the Georgian people is that we expect these allegations to be investigated. A lot of the irregularities or procedural inconsistencies that we have seen have happened before, maybe not at the same scale, but many shortcomings were identified in previous ODIHR OSCE observation missions, including during the last parliamentary elections, and they've not been addressed so far. So we expect the Central Election Commission and all relevant authorities in Georgia to investigate now these allegations and take action. We expect clarifications here. And we also wait for the final OSCE ODIHR report and recommendations, which we hope will give more clarity on these questions. Regarding your question about what does it mean for our relationship with Georgia, you know that the relationship has faced severe complications over the past months following the very controversial decisions taken by the government and the parliament, including the adoption of laws that go against EU values and undermine the fundamental rights of the Georgian people. So since then, the decision has been made to stop the enlargement process. It has de facto come to a halt, and this is still the case now. So obviously, the concerns that are expressed here and that have been expressed in previous assessments by the Commission on the enlargement process need to be clarified. And there are broader issues on which we still need clarifications in order to look again at our relationship with Georgia. So this is also what I think the HRVP in his statement together with the Commission tried to pass yesterday. Time is here now for calm. We need forces to get together. But we also need the clear commitments on the way ahead when it comes to EU accession.
Thank you very much. Maybe just also a follow-up question. What are the scenarios or the options now discussed in Brussels as an outcome of this discussion? On one hand, there seems to be quite a big manipulation. On the other hand, there is in the end election result which is confirming not a pro-European path government. Yeah, so I think, and we still have this quite majority of the people who want to stay on this path. So where do you see, what are the scenarios from an EU perspective dealing with a much more difficult situation, let's say it like this, in Georgia, with a quite big split also between a governing party and bigger parts of the society?
Yes, I think this is also why in our public communication yesterday we insisted first and foremost on the fact that we know where the Georgian people stand for. They've demonstrated this for months, over the past months, their attachment to democratic values and also to EU aspirations. And therefore, this is something that remains, at the core of our engagement with Georgia and is not forgotten. We've taken note of the declarations of the ruling party over the weekend, announcing that they would go back to the EU track. Now, this can only be assessed based on actions. So we don't want to speculate on scenarios. We want to see what are going to be the actions of the new government once it is formed. And there, the European Council, so the EU leaders have been very clear that we expect Georgia to adopt a certain number of reforms that are in line with the EU values. So we would expect that to happen. We would expect also the problematic legislations to be repealed as a matter of priority. And on that basis, we can then envisage further scenarios with Georgia.
So just to clarify, there's no preparation for any kind of policy options in the end, if this or that will happen from a institutional perspective in Brussels.
We always preparing for different options. Now we are looking at what is going to happen in the next days and weeks. The president of the European Council already announced that he will put this on the agenda of the leaders on the 8th of November at the informal European Council meeting. Then there will be a meeting of foreign ministers on the 18th of November called by the High Representative that will also discuss this and look at options. We actually have a number of options that were already discussed by foreign ministers in June following the adoption of the infamous law on foreign influence. And all of these options are still on the table. So now, again, it really depends on what we will see in the next days and weeks in Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I do a quick second round, and then I will open up for questions. Saba, I would come back to you and ask you, so maybe you have scenarios. What are the what are the next steps? Also the question about independent investigations, whom you would see who could do this kind of investigations, because I think we know also from the last election how difficult it was then also to challenge rigged results. And it's about the street then in the end who has to do it in a way, but it's also a question about reaction of the partner countries and then maybe also bringing transparency in the whole process. So where do you see this moving? Where do you see the options now in which the country is and also civil society is?
Yes, the options, yeah, excuse me, the options are quite limited. As the GD has basically captured all of the state institutions, there does not remain any sort of independent institution which has any sort of public trust that would investigate this sort of a crime. So and GD would never agree on some sort of independent international committee or something like that to investigate vote buying and other manipulations that they actually committed 2 days ago or even weeks before that. So what remains is basically what the public will do. This remains to be seen. I mean, the public right now are very much surprised. Everybody's surprised. Even the GD voters were en masse, I think, surprised because not even they expected 54%. This was like this was some news to them. Like everybody was thinking, do they get 42% maybe, or do they get 47%, something like that? And 54 is a lot. So I think this yesterday and today will be some sort of this shock moments for the people, and then we will see what the public decides. If the public accepts this outcome, then there's I think nothing to be done, nothing else. If not, then we'll see, and we will require international support, and the key aspect will be how the political parties decide to move forward. I don't think they will accept these results. I don't think they will go to the parliament, and it is we had communications with them yesterday, and they're still talking within their ranks, and we'll see what they come up with, the political parties and also the president, and the civil society will probably just go with them in this fight alongside with the parties and the president, because what we saw is a very clear rigged election. Thank you.
Maybe just one follow-up question, because this has not been mentioned. How do you see the Russia factor in all this? Also, we saw the reaction of the Russian side. We saw also this interaction, I would say, in the information sphere between some politicians in Georgia and Russian officials. How this now will impact also on this dynamic we see now from your perspective?
Yes, Russia was very much glad that it turned out the way it did. Orban was the first to congratulate the ruling party, but Russian politicians and not just politicians, even the propagandists like Dugin followed very quickly. And then Aliyev, who is another authoritarian in our region, followed. So it is quite clear that they are very content with the outcome, and Russia will probably sort of reward what the GD did here in Georgia, but how it remains to be seen. There are rumors that Russian specialists are in Tbilisi right now, who are specialized in sort of counter propaganda so that the people accept the results of the election. So everything right now is very hard to sort of predict. I would say it all hangs in balance right now.
Thank you. Mariam, maybe also on this a question to you. What is your expectation from the public now inside of the country? How is the mood also in the society? We heard just people were really surprised about the level of support in the outcome of the election. What would you expect? It's maybe a bit speculation, but it's also about the mood in the society or also in the civil society.
Yeah, I mean, it was for me. It was hard to predict what would happen on the election day, despite my impressions of how people felt. And I personally think Georgian Dream's rating has never been this low among the people. I mean, I'm not talking only about impressions in the capital, but as a journalist, I've been traveling all over the regions. I've been meeting people. There were a lot of also regional media outlets who have spent like months talking with people living in the remote or mountainous areas and like sharing their thoughts, and people were very anti-government. So of course, everyone's confused. I agree with that. First, like for me, the first shock came because like I stayed on one of the polling stations on the election day where they were counting, and usually I always do that because I stay on the big polling stations, and usually the results that come in from the big polling stations in Tbilisi Shore is telling something. And the one that I stayed on was in the first school, the first gymnasium. It's a quite big polling station, and also a lot of observers were present on that station. So it would be hard to use these methods that were used in the region. So when the first results came from this polling station, I saw the reactions of people who were there, including the Central Election Commission members, and also I posted about it in the internet. There were some like first results coming from the other places from Tbilisi, and it felt right. So in this kind of results that I got from that, so one polling station opposition was winning. I think it was about 42%, and GD was much lower. And it kind of was closer to the picture I had in mind. That was the feelings all over the country. I didn't expect the Georgian Dream would receive like lower than 30 or something like that. I even think that they could get, I don't know, a few more seats than 75 or 76 that they needed. But yeah, so I mean, it's very hard for me as well to predict what's going to happen, but I do expect a lot of people coming out today in the streets just to demonstrate that they don't accept these results, and they will somehow like try to defend their vote, which I mean, they think that was not reflected in the final results. What will happen after that? I mean, I agree with Saba that calling for Georgian government to investigate election violations is not bringing anything, because they are obviously not going to do that. So how change the situation? I guess via street or via some Western pressure. I don't know in what way, but I don't believe that this can be resolved in a matter of like institutions inside the country.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mele, maybe also a quick question to you. How much Georgia is on the agenda at the moment in Germany, and how united are the member states also in reacting to this kind of manipulation of the result? Or possible demonstrations also in Georgia, and possible escalation maybe even.
Yeah, starting with how much the European Union and its member states are looking at Georgia. I have the impression that the attention is quite high, and I think it is very important that is so. And you just mentioned the probably upcoming demonstrations, and I think that's something we have to observe very, very closely as well. And not just, of course, looking at how many people actually are gonna take on the streets, but also looking at potential suppression of those demonstrations and how the current government in GD will respond. I think that's going to be very important. Looking at the unanimity, I hate the word, looking at how much the states are standing together. I think that's so far, I think the statements from various countries are in line with each other, but I think that's something we have to see in the coming days. I think that's a bit early probably to say already.
Thank you. And Julian, maybe asking to you, we had the Moldovan elections, now we have this election, and I think, how to say it, we see on one hand also quite a strong Russian influence into these elections, and also developments in a situation of war in which Europe is at the moment, which goes also from a European perspective in a very difficult direction. So you are also responsible for several countries, in this eastern neighborhood. How do you link this? How do you see these trends and also Russian interference into elections, manipulations from a EU perspective?
Thank you. I think the situation in Moldova is quite different. Obviously, these are two candidate countries, and you see the government in Moldova has made tremendous efforts, not only to carry on reforms, but also to address unprecedented level of interference and then hybrid threats coming from Russia. We don't see the same interference in Georgia, I think, and hearing also people before me, what we see in Georgia is disinformation, harsh rhetoric, but fueled by the ruling party themselves, using techniques that are very close to the Russian toolbox. In Moldova, we see a clear presence of Russia and its proxies. I think the authorities have unveiled a very large illicit campaign financing scheme. They've also shown the role of the Orthodox Church, and several investigations are ongoing, which we are following closely. But we saw that this interference in Moldova, had a strong impact on the result, at least, of the referendum, which was at the end positive. This is something that we have welcomed. When it comes to Georgia, once again, we see that the responsible for entities for spreading this information lies within Georgia. There's no need there for stronger Russian influence, and so we've already addressed this with the Georgian authorities and asked them to stop their rhetoric that go against their EU path and against the European Union in general.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I would like to bring the auditorium in. I would prefer if you raise your hands and ask questions, maybe introduce also yourself very short. Would prefer not to have poor presentations or long statements, but really concrete questions. So if there's anybody who wants to come in, I would also collect a couple of questions and then give it back to the panel. Yeah, is there anybody who wants to ask something or to add something very shortly? But maybe you can also use the electronic hand, but Irakli, I can see you. So let's start with you. I cannot hear you, but I can see you.
Mine,
yeah,
electronic.
now we have you.
Thank you for inviting me, and it was really a very important discussion. I'm Irakli Mchadlishvili. I represent Council on Defense and Security. It's a non-government organization working with Georgian government, Ministry of Defense, and for a long time. So, I'm never was focused especially on actions and election techniques. I'm just observing this situation as a regular citizen. What was very evident, strange, and not only for me, but for a lot of people around, that now we are speaking about violations. Or yes, my impression is the same. It should be studied. I haven't got now ready, I mean, assessments, what was especially not right, and but it obviously should be studied. But what was strange for me, just before the elections, all oppositional parties tried to ensure population that it will people have such rate or some manipulated because there was no obvious mechanism of control of this from the independent entities. So, but opposition parties absolutely all tried to ensure people that it will not be rigged, and it was a little bit strange for us based on which assumptions they are claiming that it will not be rigged. And just after the election, the same parties are now saying that it was rigged, and it's of course, and that's why people, Georgian representatives, now mention that they are shocked, and we all are shocked a little bit. But its shock is coming just because of one of the reasons is that we were not ready for this. Instead, to study in advance this guarantees of fair election, I mean, society is not ready now to assess it. I mean, and now these violations need thorough studying, I think. Yes, it's just one comment which I would like to add. Yeah.
Thank you. There are also questions in the chat which already are in the way of answering. So I take more hands also. You know the reaction button downstairs and can raise your hand. Nastya, you are the next.
Thank you. I'm Anastasia Pochimban from German Council on Foreign Relations. I have two questions. One is for you, Julian. So you mentioned that you're also waiting to see what would be the reaction from the government. But I mean, I also think we can't expect a bigger change that they suddenly become very cooperative and remove the foreign agent legislation, for instance. But in this context, how do you see also the discussion about the potential removing of the visa-free regime? Is that something on the table at your end? And then I have a question perhaps to Mariam, to you. I mean, you mentioned, and I think we all agree that the elections might have been rigged. But my question would be, what are the instruments we have now to really see the scale of violations? Because there is a report I saw from ISFET and the preliminary reports, it's not such a big margin apparently. So what tools and instruments we have to act favor? And also, I mean, how do you expect also, what are the expectations from the opposition parties now? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will add maybe two more questions since I don't see any additional questions. On one hand, what is the role of the president now? What role she can really play? I think her position is not so strong in the whole system, but I think she is somehow a key actor now, and the only credible actor which is still in a political position, yeah, in a way. So from maybe to the Georgian colleagues, where do you see her role? And then about the opposition, is the opposition also part of the problem in a way, and maybe not of the solution? Yeah, in a way that do they really offer this alternative more people would vote for? I think the classical problem maybe, and how united is the opposition now also in the reaction, how well they have managed also their own campaign in a way, in a very, I understand this, in a very difficult environment. So Saba, maybe we start with you, since I don't see any other additional questions.
Okay. The president is currently, the president has a sort of unifying role for all the political parties and also the civil society. She also has the highest approval rating of all among all opposition leaders, either formal or informal. So she has sort of legitimacy from the people. And we expect her to sort of continue this way. She has also very good ties with the international leaders, and we expect her to have like a prominent role in the upcoming days, whether it be like the demonstrations or anything else. The opposition, they what they lacked the most was sort of the ground game, I would say, especially in the regions, and also maybe some sort of a very some sort of signs of unification, signs of ability that they would be able to work together if they were given, if they were elected in a coalition government type of way. In the first regard, however, like the ground game, it was quite, I think, impossible. Like they wouldn't have a good presence in the regions, even if they tried, because what we saw in the a year ago, 2 years ago, was that when the opposition political parties tried to sort of establish some presence in the regions, so like to sort of get some sort of organization going, the local persons there would be subjected to illegal surveillance, constant surveillance from the Special Security Service, and so on. So the ruling party actively sabotaged their attempts to sort of establish any ground game in the regions, and this is why they had just they had to concentrate on the urban areas and the smaller cities. That was basically all that they could campaign in. The second thing is that even though they wanted to seem as an alternative to GD, they didn't want to be seen as too blended in together, because then it would make it easier for GD to call all of them like the UNM and so on, and it would sort of discourage their potential voters from voting for them. So the political parties, the opposition parties, probably made some sort of mistakes, but however, they were very, very much sabotaged from the GD, and it is very hard to think about what is more that they should have done, what's more that they could have done. And obviously, hindsight is 2020, and it is easier from this perspective to talk about their mistakes. But I think it was a consensus among among the people that they were sort of doing what they should have been doing in the previous months.
Mariam, there was also a direct question to you.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is like right now we are in a process of collecting all kinds of violations, not only from the monitors, but from the citizens. And like categorizing them and so on. But I think also what could be very helpful is to speak with the countries where electronic vote was conducted already, and what kind of like manipulations are possible to do in this kind of electronic vote. For example, there were very few organizations and people working on what possible manipulations could be done on the electronic vote. One of them was government was never willing, and the election commission was never willing to share the source code for this machines and how the lists were loaded into these machines. I'm not sure they will be providing it post-election either, but like there needs to be somewhere to start and investigate how this equipment was used in order to rig the elections. I cannot say anything specific right now because everything is too new. I know for sure that something was very, the scales of the violations regarding the ID cards, as also Saba mentioned, was not small. The scales was large and it was like thousands of cases. We cannot say that it would not affect whatever they did. So obviously a lot of investigations would be done, but it will take time. So before this happens, I think developments may develop faster than the results of these investigations will come. So.
Melle, do you want to comment on anything which was asked or said? And maybe also just a final question to you. How do you see, what does it mean for the EU integration process also? So do you think it's now should put everything on hold? There should be kind of isolation policy, or do you think the doors should be open? How you see this also with this very difficult situation in which the country is?
I think looking at the fact that the elections were not as they are supposed to be, and we have a very, very unclear situation, I think it is quite certain that we cannot proceed in the process right now. And I think everything that was said in the last month, looking at the foreign agent law and the anti-LGBTQ legislation, we have to still stick to that. I think the situation has become even more difficult towards the EU process. But at the same time, I think it is very important to just repeat on every occasion that as soon as those problems are solved and then the door to the European Union stays wide open. But of course, this election and everything that came with it just makes it much more complicated because, the situation is as it is. So I think we have to continue our kind of two-sided approach that is very clear towards the anti-European and pro-Russian anti-democratic leaders.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe it's the same question to you, Julian, also, but maybe a bit different angle. Does the EU has the right instruments and tools to deal with such a situation? It's mainly about also enlargement policy, which I think now will be difficult. We have the neighborhood policy, how to deal with such a very difficult situation in which Georgia now is. On one hand, in supporting maybe also civil society, and you need to have also official relations with the country, but then also seeing how manipulation and autocratic trends have become more obvious, and it has also impacts on neighbors, like what happens in Armenia also. So how do you see the EU here also as an actor in a way dealing with these kind of crises?
Well, you referred to the enlargement process. The enlargement process is based on very strict criteria, in particular respect for fundamental rights and freedoms. And this is why, the decisions that I described before that we've been taking since June, halting the enlargement process, suspending direct assistance to the Georgian authorities, and redirecting our support to civil society. These are the measures that we took and that are still in place. The enlargement report will be, the new enlargement report for this year will be issued by the Commission on Wednesday, and it will provide clear recommendations to the authorities on first our assessment of the past few months and weeks, but also our expectations for the future. So there, I think we have a very strong instrument to assess and also make recommendations. one of the questions was related to the visa-free regime. There is a yearly assessment where we also look at all criteria, including one that is related to fundamental rights. And we can expect the Commission to make recommendations on that basis. For now, our expectations is that the new government, when it will be established, will recommit Georgia to its EU pass and will follow the recommendations that are provided in the enlargement report and which provide the basis then for decisions by the EU leaders in December. This leaves a bit of time to see what's going to happen in the next days, weeks, to see also, we know that protests are being called for this afternoon. We want to see how this unfolds. We obviously asking all political forces to act constructively and in a peaceful manner. But I think this, again, to respond to your questions, are the tools that will allow the EU to have a strong and united response by December.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the next days especially, but also the next weeks will be very important for Georgia and yeah, the whole dynamics we have. And I think we will follow closely also and comment also on what's happening and staying also in a close contact with our Georgian colleagues. I would like to thank the speakers in the name of the German Council on Foreign Relations for joining on this morning very close to this election. The event. Thank you for your inputs, for the discussions, and thanks also to all who joined the event, who asked questions and commented on this. Thank you very much, and all the best, yeah, especially for our Georgian colleagues, and all the best for all of us.